So far, every time I have sat down to film/record an episode, I am in a different setting each time because I'm doing my best to find a room where the sound quality is going to sound really great. It sounds so nice in my earphones when I'm listening to this podcast and editing it through, and then when I listen out of the earphones, it sounds so interesting and nasally. That could be my own self-criticism. I don't really know. But hello all, for those who are new and those who have returned. I'm Polina Rose, and this is my podcast, Breaking the Fourth Wall with Polina Rose. Quick recap. The fourth wall is an imaginary line between the spectators and the actors. Breaking the fourth wall in theater, we bring attention to the artificiality. Breaking the fourth wall with Polina is discussing theater's artificiality. By breaking the fourth wall, we're talking about the lesser known parts of theater. If you've been tuned in for a while, I like to start off my episodes with a quote, and then near the ending of the episode, I really try to tie in what I just said back into that quote. So for today's episode, the quote is, "We are all actors. Being a citizen is not living in society, it is changing it." Augusto Boal. Today's episode may feel like a history lesson, but I promise you, I'm going to do my absolute best to make it not seem that way. But right now, when I just read that quote that states, "We are all actors, being a citizen is not living in society, it is changing it." When I state that, it relates to my discussion topic today, which is not only going to cover theater of the oppressed, but it also is going to investigate how theater has been an art form to move, persuade, motivate, and support society in their actions. Not only does theater do this and continues to do this today, as previously stated before, theater tells us stories in today's world and about the phenomenons that are occurring in it. I'm going to say the quote one more time just so we can have it sit with us as I begin to give you a little lesson. We are all actors. Being a citizen is not living in society, it is changing it. Augusto Boal. In my original script for this episode, I had originally put, let's do a quick introduction for Augusto Boal. Unfortunately, that's not the case. As I researched this guy and then rewrote, re-recorded, and did all this introduction stuff, his introduction is anything but quick. However, I think it's really important because Boal won't be our only topic of discussion, but more importantly, his forms and techniques of theater influenced those back then, but these forms of theater and techniques he created, they still live on today. And I like to think of these techniques and forms of theater modernized because as generations evolve, we evolve, and the world evolves. But also, given that it's the 21st century, things tend to be more modernized. Alright, so who is Augusto Boal? I'm going to reference him by Boal from now on because it's just a mouthful. Boal was a Brazilian theater practitioner, drama theorist, and political activist. He was the founder of the Theater of the Oppressed, which is a theater form originally that was used in radical left popular education movements. Radical left basically means those who were lefties supported/wanted democratic socialism and anti-capitalism. So with Boal's left-wing mindset, he was known for his opinion of that only the oppressed are able to set the oppressed free. I'll repeat again. Only the oppressed are able to I apologize, I fucked that up. Only the oppressed are able to free the oppressed. Boal had this argument that traditional theater was oppressive because spectators/the audience didn't really get a chance to express themselves and or even be involved. So because of this, he thought bringing in collaboration between both parties, meaning the actors on stage and the spectators, he allowed spectators to perform actions that were socially liberating with this collaboration between the two. Boal was a creator of many theater methods, like a ton. As I was researching the guy, it was honestly a little bit difficult because I would love to touch base on everything. However, that's not what I'm here to do. But I'd like to give you all of his forms as well as some techniques that I felt really pertain to this episode. So one of his main theater methods was called forum theater, and it's originally was practiced in Peru, and by Boal, his forum method basically consisted of the spectator replacing the actor in order to determine the solution to a given problem presented by the actor. And then these problems that were able to be suggested could range from anything, but a lot of these problems that the spectators brought on stage were in relation to their real problems and those or someone in the community were facing. Although Boal created these innovative plays that combined dramatic and visual arts, He was imprisoned and also tortured by many of the military police because he was so subversive in his theater. When he was trying these techniques, eventually all of these techniques merged into different theatrical styles. And this makes a ton of sense because each technique was using a different process and a different result came out of that technique. So because of this, he organized his theatrical system into a tree diagram, basically. So picture a nice tree. There's techniques as limbs, and they're stemming from different techniques. And just like the branches of government, theater actually has branches too. It just is because it's so historical, I don't think it's really brought into today's teachings and practicings of theater. So quite literally, on this tree diagram, he had the major, quote, branches, but the branches included all of the techniques and all of the practices and how to do his forms of theater. Before I state the branches, I want to bring attention that these findings are found through a Philadelphia blog post on a theater terminology and a glossary specifically for theater of the oppressed, which was Boal's creation, just as a quick refresher. So starting off, image theater. Image theater was this performance technique in which one person, who acts as the sculptor, molds one or more people acting as statues. And they only use touch, and they resist the use of words. But Boal basically claimed this form of theater to be one of the most stimulating because of its ease of enactment and its capacity of portraying thought in such a concrete form. And due to the absence of language idiom, that really helped this form of theater because each word has a denotation common for all, as well as a connotation that is unique for each individual. Another example that's a little bit easier is embracing. When I think of embracing, I think of hugging someone. But in many other ways, especially the more negative meanings of embrace, it could mean to hold tightly or to harass. However, the word just has the definition of clasping another person in the arms. It just doesn't necessarily tell how one does that. So on stage, when these spectators do come out, it was very easy to see their emotions and intents. Next up, as I just mentioned a couple minutes before, is forum theater. To go into more depth, forum theater essentially was born from, quote, simultaneous dramaturgy. So it's this concept where the spectators becoming a dominant force within, I suppose. With forum theater becoming a thing, it took the character of public discussion or a series of proposals that could then be addressed, but only a dramatic format. Forum theater basically encourages to not only imagine change, but to actually practice that change for the spectators who are watching. So by coming on stage as a spectator to replace the protagonists and act out an intervention, this was, quote, breaking the oppression. Not only is the oppression being broken, but the participant, the spectator, they're also able to realize and express / experience the challenges of achieving the improvements that the others suggested. So there is kind of a twist to this, though. I read that for the actors who were encouraging these spectators to come on stage, they needed to play against the spectators' attempts to intervene and change the story. And this offered a lot of strong resistance so that the difficulties in making changes in the show are really acknowledged, but also it just teaches us the lesson and shows us in person how difficulties to make change in the real world take time. I love his concept, but I also feel like change is not an easy flowing thing to undergo in reality for some people. So the fact that the actors get to change their reaction beyond the script, I really loved. And this really reminds me of an improv game almost, because I remember growing up and there was this game where I think it was called Yes and or No. I don't even know, but in order to volunteer, you were watching two actors doing this scene, improv, whatever, and when you heard a sentence that they said and that you wanted to join in, you would scream out some word and then replace whoever you wanted, and then just keep going on with whatever scene. Even with forum theater, the actors performed the play by the scripted core once for the audience, and this was just to show the oppression that was relevant. And after reaching this scripted conclusion in which this oppressed character per se in the show fails to overturn their oppression, the actors then begin the production again, and that's when the spectators get to jump in and change the story.
Who tells your story?
Another form of theater that Boal created is invisible theater. So invisible theater is this form of theatrical performance, yet again, that's enacted in this place where, not this place, it's enacted in a place where people would not expect it. It's like a flash mob. So they could be doing this in a parking lot or a mall, etc. And so these performers attempt to disguise the fact that there's a performance going on. And I really like that because it's definitely the opposite of breaking the fourth wall. It's like totally ignoring that there are people around you watching this, but the show must go on. Even with the actors, they could even choose who is observing them and offer them to step into the performance. Alright, quick check-in with my classroom. I hope we have found that there's this reoccurring theme with Boal really preaching through his theater about oppression and social issues. He's this individual who's not only voicing these issues and experiences of oppression, but he also got so many other people on board to practice and perform his theories that he vocalized. Another form that he created was newspaper theater. This sounds just like it's stated. It's basically a system of techniques devised to give the audience a way to transform daily news articles or any non-dramatic pieces into a theatrical scene. And then lastly, just a piece of information I found to be really hopeful in a way is the rainbow of desire technique that Boal made. It's basically a technique that's gonna extend from image theater, and it's more to focus on the forms of internalized oppression, which are played out by the protagonist in relation to the antagonist. I'm gonna repeat that word, internalized. This internalized practice of rainbow of desire was soon just noted as drama therapy, and this later began to motivate Boal to make more introspective techniques in theater that would be a form of theater and therapy. And I really do like that idea because, to reiterate, I'm a firm believer that theater drama needs to be drama. And as an actress and being on stage and going to auditions, whatever, it allows you to get your wounds out, or just your internalized thoughts that you don't tell anyone. And in no way am I oppressed. But metaphorically, this oppression can be the everyday drama that could have been in my social life, but whatever character I was playing a show at the time, I harnessed my own experiences and drama to play it out to my best, and not just by studying my character and its history. I think you have to internalize yourself, just like Boal suggests, in order to perform something as realistically as possible. I feel a little bit more equipped just in my knowledge because I understand the importance of knowing how necessary it is to spread these, quote, healing skills that Boal did make, and that we've learned, and that I just learned. I want to spread them to communities that may not have access to them. Alright, and then also one more theater technique he did, which I think is so fun. It almost reminds me of just a rough run-through of a play, but it's called legislative theater. And Boal, during his theater career, he also was a councilman in Rio de Janeiro, I believe, and he created this new form of theater, and it was basically to give his voters the opportunity to voice their opinions. And the objective was basically to open up dialogue between his citizens and his institutional entities, I suppose, so that there was this flow of power between both groups. And this legislative process, Boal liked to call transitive democracy. But basically, transitive democracy is in which it lies between the direct democracy, which was practiced in ancient Greece, and delegate democracy. I know it sounds a lot similar to forum theater. However, the subject of the production being based on laws being passed and proposing these laws to be passed, I think it was a really cool way to get spectators to take the stage and express their opinions without the fear of being judged, maybe, or losing a friend over a political view. And also some 13 or something laws were created by Boal through this legislative theater practice that he made. And I never knew this, but I wish it was practiced more, but it's been practiced in the countries of the United Kingdom and Canada, so that's really neat. There's plenty of other techniques and forms used too in theater, but I just wanted to address the most popular and prominent ones in relation to today's world. These types of theater techniques are not only to better our understanding of ourselves, but they're also this new way to process and possibly begin to heal from these, quote, wounds I mentioned, and inflicted by these, whether it's mental, emotional, physical oppressions we face every day. Alright, class is wrapped for that one, guys. But in relation to Boal's techniques and how they play out with the rest of this episode, what I'm really going to try to talk about today in this second part, / half, I suppose, is there's this role in society that needs to be filled, but it's to tell a story, especially now in the 21st centuries. We need to learn how to do that. Stories have to carry meaning, and stories carry meaning with only emotion, I think, and without emotion, you learn nothing. I read an essay written by Anne Bogart, who is an American theater director, and she states, you need 3 things to tell a good story in the theater in particular. 1, you need technique. 2, you need passion. And 3, you need to have something to say. I think of it like a 3-legged milk stool. If one leg is missing, the whole thing falls down. So if you have something to say, and you have a passion but no technique, it's not going to work. If you have technique and nothing to say, well, you know where I'm going with this. End quote. So stories need to create this memory and identity. With Boal's practices and techniques and the way he told stories, with or without audience participation, he created an identity that we cannot help mend something unless you have already experienced what needs to be mended. He created theater for the oppressed, specifically in where those who couldn't be vocal could be, or move physically and represent how they felt and what they wanted to happen. And lastly, to wrap up Boal specifically, it's difficult to talk about difficult topics, and even today, people don't like to talk what they're afraid of. So I think it's really inspiring that Boal allowed his people to participate and had this motive to spread his word across different cities and towns. He let the invisible become visible.
On the road to hell, there was a railroad track. Oh, come on! And a train coming up from way down below.
Okay, I'm sure we've heard enough about Augusto Boal, and I'm sorry that it was a lot, but I really felt like it was prominent in today's discussion because relating to the 21st century and the techniques in theater, the emotions, the storytelling, etc., theater really tells this story, and it relates to things that are happening in today's world and that are prominent in today's world. One of the most things that is prominent in today's world is the war against Ukraine. Just for some background, basically ever since Russia launched this full-scale war in Ukraine because of their desire to join NATO, 6 million Ukrainians have fled this country. 6 million plus even have fled this country. And I feel so drawn to talk about this because as a Ukrainian-born citizen and knowing I have Ukrainian blood rushing in me and that graciously I'm such a privileged individual, it feels wrong not to discuss the country I was born in. To be transparent, I really don't feel educated enough to be talking about the specifics on the war against Ukraine and the specifics of what Russia is doing to them. However, my dad very lovingly and graciously sent me this article a few weeks ago about how Ukraine and theater are becoming alive again in that country and how Ukraine is incorporating this tragedy into their performance art. And to be quite frank, that was the original topic for this podcast, but I just didn't feel like I had something to back it up, so I needed to find something to compare it to. So yeah, it's in the second half of this podcast, but I'm really excited to talk about it. Basically, this article my dad sent me kind of gave an overview of the organization and the artistic evolution of theaters in Ukraine, especially during this war. In summary, the article basically expressed how Ukrainian theaters have been used for shelters for the displaced people and how there's so much in this volunteer movement and their assistance to the Ukrainian army and the people who are displaced. They really dedicated their time, their hope, and their emotions onto them. It's really interesting because when I heard that these stages that used to hold our brothers and sisters as actors are now holding our brothers and sisters to sleep on and feel shelter over the night and are basically acting as a cot. And throughout the other information that I did research after reading the article, it's really heartwarming and hopeful to watch a country that I was born in, that I really don't recollect living in, but I just feel so energetically drawn to it. So throughout the other information I researched, it's so hopeful to watch Ukraine not only fight back physically, but also fight back through telling their own stories through such a tragic experience and ongoing experience they're going through. There's this theater in Ukraine called Mariupol Theater, and basically a Russian bomb bombed this theater, and this theater was functioning as this living symbol of Ukrainian culture. And in the past years, the theater was performed only in the Ukrainian language, and that's something really to take note of, because some Ukrainian theaters weren't doing strictly Ukrainian plays. They were doing Russian language or Ukrainian language. But ever since the war struck, Ukrainians only delivered plays and those who wrote them in the Ukrainian language. After looking at pictures and knowing it's totally in a pile of ruins, it is really, I don't want to say heartbreaking, but it's tough to look at. And I don't want to say it's heartbreaking to look at, but I know in different countries, I know in other countries, theater thrives. And knowing that something that had so much energy put into this stagnant building had now been destroyed is really sad to think about. This article states that the Russians are here to destroy the entire Ukrainian artistic expression, and that's explaining why they abducted a lot of different playwrights and directors, etc. Bringing attention to those playwrights since the invasion, they're not only there to reflect the horror of this experience they're going through, but they're there to give the audience a different perspective into the shock and the confusion that they've experienced ever since the war began. I remember that when the war against Ukraine broke out, that even liquor stores weren't selling Russian liquor, and I think that's really respectful to think of, because even though Ukraine is in such a vulnerable spot right now, I find it really admirable that they're still standing strong and only standing by them, their words, and their country. Even when reading this article my dad sent me, there were these emotions triggered. And as I mentioned before in this episode, emotions are something that need to be experienced when theater is happening. And they don't necessarily need to be negative. I know when emotions are mentioned, a lot of our mindset and mind processes to the negative feelings that emotions can have. I honestly think that. If I hear emotions, I'm like, okay, sad, angry, upset, frustrated, pissed off, But emotions can be happy, exhilarating, ecstatic, all of these other positive things. So when I was reading this article, yes, I did feel very dark, I guess, while reading it. Not that that's an emotion, but it's just the tone that I was reading in. However, with the hopefulness of this article and how theater has been rejuvenated through these people's tragic experiences. So with the triggering emotions, the only reason this happened is because playwrights in Ukraine basically started writing plays again during the war. And these plays not only talked about how Ukraine was their home and how it was crumbling and how they were losing their creative potential, but it also stated the experiences that they were going through right then in the moment. With the Russian invasion happening, theater in Ukraine was really dead for quite a time. And because there were these playwrights to first break the silence, they not only gained so much recognition with their mainstream academic theaters, but they also used uncensored vocabulary, and they were really unbiased when writing these shows, and it created this provocative underground tendency that audiences were attracted to. There was this show I was reading about, and it was by Irina Harris, and she organized this collection basically of dramatic texts and made them available in this portal of modern Ukrainian drama. And she presented them in a collection of plays entitled The Russian Ship Go to Hell. And this play embodied the authentic voice of the Ukrainian people and theater, and how those whose creative potential were scattered around the world was forced to move into the shelters now because of the invasion. Continued reading, basically her plays were set out into the world, and I think that's really cool, and also can relate to Boal, because in relation to oppression and what I said back then of how you can't mend something unless you've experienced what needs to be mended. By the way of this playwright creating a show where it's real life things happening over an electronic device, I think that not only brings view to the oppressed, but also brings view to the invisible. And she's really making these emotions and these tragic events and these daily things that people are experiencing that really should not be experiencing in 2023. And after this was released, basically more plays came out and their performances were showing the trauma and suffering from all these unhealed wounds. And they were able to do this authentically because they had been through it. And each scene proves more painful to be than the last, you know what I mean? And throughout these plays, their focus was on separation, loss, despair, fear, and even the audiences could envision the future for Ukraine. And I found that really inspiring because the people in Ukraine believe in themselves and in their country and in their victory, honestly, and they won't be stopped by the enemies who are surrounding them. And I know that the war has really deprived Ukrainians of theater, and probably with theater there's a lot of comfort that comes with that, security, financial stability, and with the loss of jobs for however many months, however much of a year, it's really inspiring to see that these theaters have now been reappearing in a country that has been so damaged over for now a year and a half. I think this relates to Boal because with the text play, for example, this playwright is taking her initial experiences, her authentic, her honest happenings that occurred during this event, and she put them into a play, into a show that can be performed in front of many other people. And just like Boal, he really tried to make theater relatable and only to be seen and extra relatable for those who were going through a tough time. And I think that with the playwrights creating such dark theater performance per se, it's not only going to allow us to feel something, but I think it will really teach us something as well as hold on to it. Because even after reading the article, I just know that with the arts recovering after the pandemic, with Ukraine recovering as this war continues to go on, I know that there's always hope within the arts. The arts always finds a way, and that's something that I really respect. And I think that's a main reason why I continue to affiliate myself with the arts, because even though there's this unknown of what's going to happen, the arts always finds a way to make it happen and make it happen greatly. So I think that even though Ukraine is in such distress right now, and my heart goes out to them so much, I think that them recovering and bringing their community of theater and actors and performers back together, it's going to expand beyond that country, and it's going to really teach us something later in life. And just like Boal, he was based in probably the 50s to 70s, and we're still practicing his stuff today. I like to think that the Ukrainians have modernized his techniques and are now portraying newspaper theater via text, or forum theater by saying one thing and having an audience member react to what is actually going on. And I think that with Ukrainians doing this, it's only gonna evolve theater more and bring more insight to theater as well. And lastly, I just want to say, I think knowing that approximately 1/4 of Ukraine's country, their total population, have left their homes and fled, as we can see theater coming back together, and that's a community within itself, I know that the community within Ukraine will come back together as well. I think it's really important to talk about not only the phenomenons that are going on in today's world, but also talk about how theater can play such a big role in today's phenomenons as well. Okay, so this has been Breaking the Fourth Wall with Polina Rose. I really appreciate it if you did tune in for this episode. To be quite transparent, this was a difficult episode for me to record and write because my dad and I were talking about how a podcast is like an essay. And I'm having to write really good essays, basically, and then trying to make them conversationalized because I don't want to just read things word for word, even if that's easier, you know? So, yeah, I just wanted to let you know that fun fact. Thank you for tuning in if you did. I appreciate whatever support I get. And if you're enjoying it, I am really happy that you are. So, in the Ukrainian language, until we meet again, das vidanya.